Spring sunlight spread gold across Silver Pine Valley. The surface of Silvermere Lake was as calm as a mirror reflecting the sky. Grace Miller sat on the side of the boat, holding the oar, her eyes following each small ripple. Beside her, Leo, her 10-year-old son, held a model airplane, his eyes bright like rays of sunlight. "Mom, if the wind changes, will the plane flip over?" "No, honey. As long as you know how to read the wind. Don't fight it, learn to go with it." A jet engine roared above. Grace looked up. A plane tilted at a dangerous angle, black smoke pouring from the engine. The jet plunged into the water, exploding in the middle of the lake. "Leo, get down!" She pulled her son close, then without hesitation, steered the boat toward the smoke and waves. The smell of fuel burned in the air. Grace threw a buoy, tied the anchor, and jumped into the icy water. She dove deep, reaching the cracked cockpit. A man was unconscious, trapped between steel frames. Grace used her knife to unlock the latch, pulled hard. The door burst open. She grabbed him, surfaced, and gasped for air. Leo trembled on the boat, eyes wide as he saw his mother pulling a stranger along. "Mom, who is that?" "Someone who needs to live." "Hand me a towel." The man opened his eyes, tried to speak. "I'm Nathan. Nathan Drake." Grace looked at him, stunned for a moment. She recognized the faded logo on the pilot's watch, Ether Dynamics, the company she once left behind, the company that had killed her husband. She said nothing, just tightened the strap of his life vest and pulled him toward the shore. Her eyes were cold, but her heart pounded as if she were seeing her beloved one last time. The morning after the crash, the sky was strangely clear. Thin mist clung to the surface of Silvermere Lake, and soft sunlight fell through the old wooden window. Grace stood in the kitchen, making coffee with the dented aluminum pot she had kept for 10 years. The bitter aroma spread through the air, blending with the warm pine scent of the small cabin. Leo sat at the table, still wearing his hand-knitted sweater. He was carefully attaching new wings to his model airplane. Every time he finished gluing a piece, he looked up, glancing at his mother. Stops working, looks out the window. He's sleeping in the living room. Being alive is enough. The boy stayed quiet. But his bright eyes were both curious and cautious, the look of a child who had learned to watch adults to guess their moods. A news broadcast came from the small radio. A private jet has crashed in Silver Pine Valley. The only survivor is Nathan Drake, CEO of Ether Dynamics. Grace reached out to turn off the radio before Leo could hear the rest. She looked out at the lake, where the smoke and debris had been swept away by the wind, leaving the surface calm as if no tragedy had ever happened. In the living room, Nathan lay on the sofa, his neck bandaged, breathing steadily but heavily. When he opened his eyes, the first thing he saw was the dark wooden ceiling. Then came the face of Grace, calm, cold, unfamiliar. "Where am I?" "My house, near Silvermere Lake. You crashed. I pulled you out of the water." Nathan tried to sit up, but pain shot through his shoulder and he groaned softly. Grace placed her hand on his shoulder to stop him. "Don't try. You lost a lot of blood and went hypothermic. Just rest." Nathan looked around. Old tidy furniture. Faded family photos. On the wall, a small picture. Grace, a young man, and a newborn baby. Light shone through the frame, falling on the face of her late husband. He is silent for a moment. "Gone. 6 years ago." The air in the room grew heavy. Nathan lowered his head. He sensed something in Grace's voice, not anger, but a wound that never healed. He touched his wrist. His pilot's watch was still there, wet and scratched. The Ether Dynamics logo glinted faintly. Grace noticed, and her eyes turned cold. "You work for Ether?" "I used to. Now I run it." A long silence. The coffee cup in Grace's hand trembled slightly, but she steadied it. A thin, forced smile flickered across her lips, fragile as paper. Such a small world. Nathan didn't understand the meaning, only nodded. She stood and looked out the window. The lake shimmered like a mirror hiding secrets. Thinking, "I saved one of them. From the company that killed him. Is heaven mocking me?" Leo appeared at the doorway, holding the airplane model. "Mom, he's awake?" "Yes. Go outside for a bit." "Leo?" The boy left, but before closing the door, he looked back at Nathan. A long, unreadable gaze, as if sensing that this man would change everything. Nathan struggled to his feet, voice hoarse. "I need to call someone." "Rescue, the company," interrupting coldly. "There's no signal here. You'll have to stay." at least until the storm ends." He went silent, a hint of caution in his eyes. And inside her, something old rekindled. Anger, pain, and fear. When Nathan turned away, Grace opened a small tin box from the wooden cabinet. Inside, under old fabric, lay an Ether Dynamics access card. The only thing she had kept after her husband's death. She gripped it tightly, eyes fixed on the man sitting in her home. The man she had just saved, and the man who carried the name of those who had taken everything from her. Evening spread across the pine trees, light glimmering on the surface of Silvermere Lake. The sky was strangely quiet, the kind of silence that felt like the world was holding its breath. Grace stood on the porch holding a cup of cold coffee. Inside the cabin, Nathan was still resting, and Leo sat by the window, drawing. The sound of his pencil brushing the paper was steady, like the heartbeat of the house. The forest beyond turned amber. The wind carried a chill, damp scent. Grace didn't know if she was trembling from the cold or from a growing sense of fear. She hadn't told anyone that she was once a systems engineer at Ether Dynamics, in the flight safety division, the only one who had ever warned about a small flaw in the control system, the one who was forced to leave after causing internal disturbance, the woman who lost her husband in a test explosion 3 weeks later. Now, the sole survivor of a plane crash lay in her house, bearing the name of the people who silenced her. Nathan woke again at dusk. He stood up, feeling heavy as if carrying a nightmare from the lake. He walked into the kitchen and saw Leo cutting paper, gluing wings onto a small balsa airplane. "What are you making?" "A flying model. Mom taught me how to read the wind so it won't crash." Nathan smiled faintly, then looked around the kitchen. Simple, warm, without technology. "Your mom's special. Yeah, she can fix anything. Except the past." Nathan froze. The boy said it innocently, but his eyes carried something deeper, as if he understood his mother's sorrow. Grace entered, a towel over her shoulder. The look between her and Nathan collided silently, tense. "You can eat something. I made chicken soup." "Thank you." He sat down. In the warm light of the oil lamp, they ate without speaking. Only the sound of spoons and the wind outside broke the silence. Then Nathan looked up. "I need to go back." "I have to know why the plane crashed." Sets the spoon down. "You really don't know?" Nathan paused. Grace's voice turned cold. "Ether Dynamics once covered up a deadly flaw, the hydraulic control system. I saw it. I wrote the report. They ignored it. My husband died in that test explosion." Nathan went silent. The story he'd heard went about an unavoidable technical accident, now became a living accusation. "Your name?" "Grace Miller." "You worked at Ether." "I did. I thought I left that name behind forever. But now you're here, like the universe reminding me nothing's over." Nathan bowed his head. Guilt filled his chest. He hadn't caused it himself, but he represented the system that had. Before he could speak, an engine sound echoed from afar. Not a truck, not rescue, a car engine. Deep, steady, expensive. Grace stepped onto the porch. 3 black SUVs were coming down the dirt road, dust rising behind them. Leo ran to her side, gripping her hand tightly. Grace stepped back, her face tense. "No one knows this place." "Except me." Nathan stood up, looking through the window. His face went pale. On the first car, a special plate. Ether Corporate Fleet. It's them. They came too fast. Grace looked at him, half suspicious, half afraid. "Are they your people or the ones after you?" Nathan didn't answer. The car door opened. A man in a long coat stepped out, a cold face, steel eyes. 2 others followed, both in dark suits, carrying briefcases. They weren't rescued. They weren't reporters. They were cleaners, the kind Ether Dynamics sent when something needed to disappear. "We need to talk, Mr. Drake, about the accident." Nathan clenched his fists. Behind the curtain, Grace stood still, every word cutting into her like a knife. She knew these kinds of people. She had seen them before leaving Ether, the ones who made the truth vanish along with those who spoke it. Grace didn't know that while she stood there, Leo was watching through the crack of the door, and in his hands was the airplane model he had just finished. That little model, only a few hours later, would become the piece that began to expose all of Ether's secrets. Rain began to fall, pattering softly on the old wooden roof. The first drops hit the porch, melting away like the fast heartbeat of the house. 3 black SUVs stopped in front of the gate, engines still rumbling quietly. The air was thick with the smell of metal, rain, and danger. Grace slightly lifted the curtain. In the headlights, Nathan was standing face to face with 3 men. She recognized it instantly. The stance, the eyes, the way their hands hovered near their coat belts. Not company staff, not lawyers. These were men hired to erase traces. Mr. Drake, we're relieved to see you alive. Who are you? Who sent you here? Smiling. Wrong question. We're here to take you home. Nathan narrowed his eyes. I don't need to be taken home. I need the black box data, the investigation report. The man in the coat stared at him for a long moment, then tilted his head. The data's been retrieved, and no one needs to worry about it anymore. As for you, you just need to stay silent. Inside the cabin, Grace heard every word. She turned slightly, signaling Leo to stay quiet. Then she went to her small workroom, pulled out an old phone, the kind that could only record audio. She turned it on and placed it near the window frame, microphone facing outside. Nathan's voice came through, low and tense. I saw what happened. The right engine lost all hydraulic pressure. That wasn't a mechanical failure. Someone tampered with it. The man's voice, calm as wind. You don't need to know who. Mr. Drake, your job is to forget. Grace felt her hand tighten. Forget, that word. She had heard it 6 years ago, when she demanded answers about her husband's death. Nathan stepped back, anger rising in his tone. I won't stay silent. An ether engineer died because of that fault. You buried it. The man said nothing. He only glanced at the one behind him. One of them opened the trunk, pulled out a thick envelope, and placed it on the ground. This is a contract, along with a compensation package. Sign it and all your troubles go away. Dry laugh. I don't sell silence. Headlights reflected in the man's eyes, cold as a blade. That's a shame, because when you refuse, we have to make sure. There are no witnesses. Grace didn't wait to hear more. She pulled Leo toward the stairs. Mom, who are they? Shh. Go down to the basement, take the flashlight, and hide there. Don't come out until I call you. Go. The boy looked at her, frightened, but obeyed. Outside, thunder rolled. Nathan stepped back to the porch. One of the men stepped forward, pulling something shiny from his coat. Stop. Grace's hand held an old handgun, the only thing left of her husband's. The heavy metal clicked with certainty. The 3 men turned, startled. Nathan stood between them and Grace. Grace, don't. They're dangerous. I know. I used to work for them. That sentence made all 3 strangers freeze. The leader narrowed his eyes, studying her. Miller. Grace Miller, systems engineer. I remember now. He let out a short, dry laugh. So the 2 traitors meet again in the woods. How ironic. Grace stepped forward, eyes sharp. You're right. But this time I have proof. She raised the recorder. The small red light blinked. All 3 men froze. You're not fast enough. He stepped closer. Pulling out his gun, Nathan reacted instinctively. He shoved the wooden door hard, slamming it into the man's shoulder, then lunged forward. A gunshot cracked, splinters flying everywhere. Grace hit the floor, rolled to the side, and pulled the trigger. Gunfire echoed through the forest, blending with rain and screams. Nathan wrestled one of the other men, his punches fueled by desperation. A dark figure fell. The 3rd man ran off, disappearing into the rain. Now the yard was filled only with heavy breathing and the acrid smell of gunpowder. Grace sat up, trembling, her eyes fixed on the motionless body. Nathan approached, voice hoarse. He's gone, she gasped, leaning against the wall. You were right. Ether doesn't want the truth to live. In the dark basement, Leo clutched the flashlight, tears streaming silently down his cheeks. He heard his mother's footsteps. The wind, then silence. But in his hands, the small airplane model glimmered under the faint light. Inside its body, by a child's innocent curiosity, was a tiny micro SD card Nathan had dropped during the crash. And on that card was the final copy of all the flight data. Grace didn't know that Leo was holding the only piece that could expose Ether Dynamics' crimes. And because of it, everyone still alive would be hunted. Morning covered Silver Pine Valley with a thin layer of mist. Light shone through the cracked window, glinting on the dry bloodstains on the wooden floor. The small cabin was silent, as if no gunshots had ever been fired. But the faint scent of gunpowder still lingered. Harsh, cold, real. Grace sat on the porch steps, hands gripping a cup of coffee. Steam rose and vanished into the fog. Her eyes were dark and hollow after a sleepless night. Nathan stood beside her, shoulder bandaged, his arm wound roughly cleaned. "We have to go." Not looking at him. "Go where?" "The whole area belongs to them. The longer we stay, the worse it gets. They'll come back. And next time, it won't be for negotiation." Grace said nothing. She knew he was right, but her heart felt heavy as stone. This was where she had rebuilt her life. Where Leo grew up, where she buried her past. And now, the past has come knocking again. She looked inside. Leo sat on the couch, holding his airplane model, pale and exhausted. "I can't let my son see any more of this." Nathan sat down beside her, voice low. "Grace, I once thought Ether was just a company, a big machine I could control. But there's something else, and I'm just another cog." Grace turned to him, eyes sharp as a blade. "You're not just a cog. You're the pilot. You sit at the top of that machine." The words caught in Nathan's throat. He wanted to speak, but only nodded, accepting it. Between them lay a silent truth. Both were victims, but neither innocent. A soft knock sounded. They both tensed. Nathan drew a folding knife from his belt, motioned to Grace. She stepped quietly to the window and peeked outside. A familiar figure, Carl, the old owner of the town's general store. She opened the door, forcing a calm smile. "I heard an explosion last night." "Are you all right?" Faint smile. "A wild animal attacked the chicken coop. Nothing serious, Carl." Carl looked past her, saw Nathan inside, shirt stained with blood. His expression changed, suspicion, but he said nothing. "You should be careful. Some strangers have been asking about you in town. 3 men. Black Cadillacs. They asked about the crash." Grace shuddered. "What did they tell you?" "Not much. Just asked if anyone new came around, then handed me a card from Ether Dynamics." Nathan stepped closer, took the card. The silver logo gleamed in the sunlight. He looked at Grace. "They're sweeping the whole area." Carl tilted his head slightly. "You should leave, Grace. You and the boy. I won't tell anyone, but I'm afraid they won't just ask questions." Grace thanked him, forcing her voice steady. When Carl left, Nathan turned, urgent. "We have to get out of the valley now. We can't take the main road." "They'll block it. Then we climb." "There's an old path west of the lake, through the abandoned research station." Grace frowned. "You know the way?" "I've been there." As director of flight safety testing. A long silence. Grace nodded, then turned to Leo. "Leo, pack your things." "Only what you need." The boy nodded. But as he turned, his airplane model slipped from his hands, the body hatch popping open. A small silver memory card rolled onto the table. Nathan bent down, picked it up. His eyes widened. This is my data card." "What?" "The auxiliary black box from the jet. I used it for independent data logging, if it's intact." He opened his laptop, inserted the card. The screen lit up. Lines of data flashed, then stopped at a pressure graph. Nathan zoomed in, voice trembling with rage. "This is proof." Hydraulic pressure dropped suddenly, not operator error. "Someone injected remote code." Grace leaned in, recognizing the numbers she once knew too well. "This code. I know who wrote it." "Who?" "Grant Hale, the chairman of Ether. The man who silenced me 6 years ago." Nathan stepped back as if struck by thunder. Grant Hale, the man he once called his mentor. He clenched his fist, voice breaking. So it was him. "He killed them." "He killed you." "He killed me." Grace looked at him. In her eyes there was no longer pure hatred, only resolve. "Now you understand. This isn't just my fight. It's ours." Leo tugged at her sleeve. "Mom, I'm scared." Kneeling. "It's okay, honey. But I need you to do something important. Keep this." She placed the memory card in his hand. If I don't come back, give this to Mr. Carl. Tell him it's the proof of light." The boy nodded, biting his lip to hold back tears. Outside, engines roared again. This time, not 3 SUVs, more. In the distance, dark shapes moved through the forest like hunting wolves. Nathan shut the laptop, shoved it into the backpack. "Let's go. Now or never." Grace hugged her son, took a deep breath. She looked back at the house, once a refuge, now just a memory. "Goodbye, Silvermere." The 3 of them ran into the forest, following the narrow path up the mountain. Behind them, SUVs stopped. Men in black stepped out, weapons ready. One spoke into his radio. "Target moving west. Carrying data. Take them alive if possible. If not, erase everything." As Grace, Nathan, and Leo disappeared into the trees, the small cabin suddenly erupted in flames, the fire rising like history being wiped clean. And in that blaze, the past began to burn away the silence. The heavy rain lashed the forest like 1,000 whips. Wind howled through the pines, carrying the smell of resin and wet earth. Grace led the way, moving fast along the steep trail, the crossbody backpack swinging with each stride. Leo clung to her hand, gasping for breath, while Nathan stayed behind them, shielding their backs. The sound of hunting dogs echoed from afar, a chilling noise blending with thunder. They were being hunted. They crossed an old wooden bridge. Below, water roared through the rocks. When Nathan stepped onto a plank, a sharp crack split the air. A rotten beam broke, the bridge shook violently. "Don't stop! Keep running!" Leo screamed as one side of the bridge gave way. Grace turned, grabbed his hand, pulled hard. Both of them tumbled onto the far side. Nathan jumped last, the bridge collapsing just as he rolled onto the opposite bank. The three lay in the mud, panting, rain pounding their faces. From afar, flashlight beams flickered through the forest, closing in. Grace pulled Leo up. "We have to reach the research station on the hill. There's a military radio. We can send a distress signal. If it still works. It was where my husband worked. I know the way. Trust me," Nathan nodded. For the first time, his voice held complete trust. No CEO, no engineer, just two people fighting to survive. As they climbed, thunder rumbled overhead, lightning flashing through the forest. In that split second of light, Grace saw a figure among the trees, standing still. Black coat, radio earpiece. She pulled Nathan down, heart pounding. "They've blocked the top," whispering. "I know another way. There's a rock pass west of here. Leads to an old test tunnel." Grace looked at him suspiciously. "You remember that? I signed off on the blueprints for this area. Trust me this time." She nodded, pulling Leo along. They turned left, running into the darkness. Rain grew heavier. The trail became a stream, mud up to their ankles. From above, the sound of a helicopter cut through the storm, searchlights sweeping across the trees. They've brought a full team, not to rescue, to bury. When they reached the rock tunnel, Grace exhaled in relief. An old metal door stood before them, rusted but intact. Nathan pried it open with an iron bar. The hinges screeched, cold air rushing out, darkness inside. The smell of mold and metal dust. They turned on their flashlights and entered. "Mom, what is this place?" Quietly. "Ether's secondary test site." "Where your father used to work." Leo gripped her hand tighter. Nathan's beam swept across the wall. Faded letters read, "Ether Dynamics, Flight Control Simulation Chamber 02. He frowned. "I can't believe this." "They use this as a hydraulic control simulator. But records said it was demolished years ago." "They say a lot of things, Nathan. Doesn't make them true." They moved deeper inside. Old computers, dusty control panels, broken lights. Grace found a secondary power panel and flipped the switch. Fluorescent lights flickered weakly overhead. On the opposite wall, the silver Ether Dynamics logo was peeling like an old scar. Beneath it stood a large metal vault. "This is the data storage cabinet. If it's intact, we can find more evidence." "Let me try." He pried it open with a steel bar. A click. The lid popped. Inside were rows of hard drives labeled with dates. One of them had scrawled handwriting. "Hydraulic core test, March 17th. Nathan picked it up, eyes bright. "This is it!" The first failed test they covered up. Grace stared at it, voice trembling. "My husband died that day." Silence froze the air. Nathan lowered his head, gripping the drive tightly. "I swear, I'll make them pay." A noise echoed. From outside the tunnel, flashlights flickered. Heavy footsteps approached. From afar, "Tracks on the west side. Be careful, there's a child with them." Grace turned off the lights, whispering, "We've been found." Nathan looked around, spotted a small hatch at the end of the corridor. "Vent shaft! Leo first!" Leo crawled in. Grace pushed the drive-through, then Nathan followed last. Behind them, flashlights swept closer. Gunfire erupted, bullets sparking off the metal walls. "Go." "Move!" They crawled through the narrow shaft, breath ragged. Above, faint light. The exit on the mountainside. They climbed out into the storm. Rain poured down in sheets. Nathan pulled the hatch shut behind them. Below, voices shouted, from below, "Check the main chamber." They have the data. Their breathing mixed with the rain. The three lay flat on the cold ground. Leo trembled. Grace held him close. Nathan looked around. Distant beams still cut through the forest like hunting eyes, whispering, "They know we're alive." "Then we'll make sure they know. We're still fighting." Lightning flashed, lighting Grace's face, covered in mud, but her eyes shone like steel. The sky hung heavy and leaden. Though the rain had stopped, the forested mountains were still soaked and bitterly cold. Deep in the Silver Pine Range, Grace, Nathan, and Leo sheltered in a small cave where the firelight flickered over tired, grimy faces that remained resolute. Leo slept in an oversized coat, shivering. Nathan faced Grace with his arm roughly bandaged. And for a long time they listened only to wind whistling through the rock and the steady drip of water. Nathan observed how brave Leo was, never complaining, which reminded Grace of her late husband and his belief that fear was acceptable so long as it didn't take control. She confessed that on the day her husband died, she had felt only emptiness, and she had known Ether was lying when they called it a technical accident. Nathan admitted he had read that report, believed the lie, and stayed quiet out of fear of losing reputation, position, and money, convincing himself he was a good man trapped in a bad system. Grace told him he was no longer inside that system and still had a chance to make things right. Nathan spoke of a secret Ether program called the Vortex Initiative, centered on remote hydraulic control. If the memory card's data was accurate, Grant had perfected it and was using it to hide multiple accidents. Grace realized Grant now knew not just about the proof, but about the survivors. At Ether's Seattle headquarters, in a sterile, sealed conference room, Grant Hale watched a satellite map with a blinking red dot near the Silver Pine Auxiliary Site. A technician reported strange outbound data routed to a Canadian server. Grant recognized the tactic and ordered the internal shadow team to handle the matter without involving authorities. Back in the cave, Nathan's low-battery laptop still showed enough to outline a plan. Reach the old relay station with a high-frequency antenna and send the data to an ally, Laura Simmons, an independent forensics engineer fired by Ether for asking questions. Grace agreed to move at first light. Nathan stayed awake, watching Leo breathe and thinking of his own daughter he rarely saw. Grace, sensing his guilt, said guilt shouldn't be buried, but turned into action. For the first time, they felt like fellow travelers out of the same darkness. At dawn, in thick fog, they headed north along a narrow trail. Leo asked when they would go home. Grace promised it would be after the truth was known. Nathan focused on the mist-shrouded ridge where the relay stood, and where Ether would try to stop them. At headquarters, Grant monitored 3 heat signatures on a slope and ordered that they be made to disappear as effortlessly as wind erases tracks. On the trail, Leo pointed out a red blink on a hill. Nathan recognized a targeting laser. They had been locked. An icy wind screamed across the mountainside. Fog was so dense that the world collapsed into pale, shifting shapes. Grace guided Leo along an ice-slick path while Nathan guarded the rear. A suppressed shot clipped a rock near their feet, a whisper of smoke curling up from a fresh hole. The shadow team had arrived. Grace hid Leo in a rock hollow and laid out his escape. If anything happened, he was to run west, follow the stream, and never look back. Nathan, with only 4 rounds and a rust-scarred Glock, engaged a fast, low silhouette sliding through the fog and put it down, buying moments they needed to reach the relay tower still standing like a rusted spine in the sleet. They pushed through the gale until the trail dropped away into a collapsed section. A rickety bridge, rusted chains, and split planks was the only crossing. Grace ferried Leo across as the structure groaned. Nathan suppressed the pursuers with 2 shots. A bullet snapped a cable and the bridge heaved sideways. Nathan lunged. Grace caught his hand and, refusing to lose anyone else, hauled him onto solid ground. They were half a mile from the relay when an Ether helicopter punched through the fog, bleaching the forest with searchlights. Since the enemy had beaten them there, Grace decided they would finish the fight on sight. Inside the helicopter, the team confirmed the trio's approach and received orders to capture if possible and to wipe everything if transmission began. The relay station was a small, dust-choked building with a leaning antenna and a locked door. Grace pried it open while Nathan threw a breaker to life through a burst of sparks. The system still worked. Grace connected the memory card. the console armed for transmission and demanded time they didn't have. A rotor wash shook the station as two agents crashed inside. Nathan, wounded in the shoulder, held them off with precise fire while Grace initiated the upload. A bullet shattered the monitor and killed the power. Nathan lay bleeding on the floor. He directed her to a pre-wired backup behind the electrical panel. She hooked it in, pushed emergency power, and watched the upload resume through the final percentages while rounds chewed the walls. The transfer completed. No matter what came next, the truth had already left the mountain. Grace fled with Leo out the back as flares from the helicopter washed the station. Behind them, the relay exploded like cold night fireworks. In Toronto, Dr. Laura Simmons received an anonymous message, "Either lied, proof attached," and watched the incoming data stream, realizing Grace had succeeded. The next morning, weak sunlight filtered through the thin mist surrounding Silver Pine Valley. The air was cold and damp, the scent of fresh pine filling the small cabin. Grace stood at the window with a tight grip on her coffee, watching the lake where faint ripples mirrored a silver-gray sky. Everything looked peaceful, but inside her a quiet storm gathered. Nathan sat on a chair with sleepless shadows under his eyes. On the table lay the morning paper, its front page screaming that Ether Dynamics was tied to a string of aviation incidents and that a former engineer had returned to the center of the storm. The photo beneath had caught him from a distance on Grace's porch. He understood then that they knew where he was. Grace, steady and sharp, reminded him that people like that always knew, ears everywhere. His hands trembled as he admitted he had wanted only the truth, not to exhume the past. She told him the past didn't care what he wanted and always returned when its debt remained unpaid. Leo padded in wearing a light blue sweater, frowned at the headline, and asked in his own way if Nathan was the bad guy the paper implied. Grace soothed him, warning him not to believe everything in print and noting how sometimes the so-called bad ones were simply those who knew too much. The boy decided he trusted Nathan anyway, having read sadness rather than malice in the man's face, something Nathan needed to hear. Engines sounded in the distance, an unfamiliar noise in the valley. Grace set her cup down and checked the window. 3 black SUVs rolled slowly along the wet gravel road, each with a temporary plate. She said they had arrived. Nathan sprang to his feet and wondered what they wanted. She corrected the question. Not what, but who, and this time both of them were likely targets. From a wooden box in the kitchen, Grace drew her late husband's pistol, the last relic of the life she'd lost. She racked it with an eerie calm, deciding they wouldn't seek trouble but wouldn't run either. A firm, deliberate knock followed, 3 beats. Leo gripped her sleeve. Grace sent him upstairs toward the back exit and promised she'd be fine. She opened the door to 3 men in black coats. The leader, tall with iron-gray hair and a commander's face, announced their purpose with the dead weight of someone used to being obeyed. Grace met them with cool, barbed poise. They asked for Nathan, offering institutional protection if he cooperated, and hinting at consequences for others if he refused. When the leader's gaze drifted toward the boy peeking from the upstairs crack, Grace stepped into the line of sight like a blade and ordered them out. Nathan advanced and warned that if they didn't leave within 10 seconds, he would make things much bigger. The air thickened. After a long beat, the leader signaled a retreat, and the SUVs rolled away, carving deep ruts in the wet road. Nathan knew they would return. Grace did too, and vowed that when they did, they would be ready. She looked out at the lake's mirrored calm, a quiet that belied the ember now burning in her eyes, the fire of someone who had lost everything and was prepared to take it back. Nathan stood behind her in the morning light seeping through the window, 2 wounded pasts aligned on a single road toward truth. By late afternoon, the wind cut through the pines with a warning hiss, and the sky sank toward the color of lead. Grace checked the windows with cold, steady hands while, on the table, Nathan's technical drawings lay spread like a map of buried secrets. He sat at the corner, pencil moving, reconstructing the hydraulic system he had once designed. Under the oil lamp, tiny notes tagged abnormal pressure points, collapse risks, and software interference. Together, they arrived at the same conclusion. None of it was accidental. Someone had altered the control algorithms to push pressure beyond the safe threshold, something that did not happen on its own. Grace wanted to know why production had continued. Nathan admitted that every time he flagged a fault, he had been told to stay quiet in the name of strategy, a strategy that killed. Lightning flashed and hardened Grace's resolve. She asked about proof. He indicated the silver USB drive, emails, data, internal logs. He understood that if they knew he still had it, threats would escalate. She answered that it had to go public. He had tried and no one believed him. Then they could believe her, she said, and in that moment he saw his late wife's courage reflected in Grace. A knock cut through the rumble of the coming storm. 3 firm beats. Grace stilled the room, palmed the pistol hidden beneath a cloth, and peeked through the curtain. The moving light in the yard belonged to police flashlights, or so it seemed. 2 men stood at the door, one older, one younger with a notebook. The older asked to come in and posed routine questions about last week's crash. Grace cracked the door but kept control. Nathan revealed himself and offered nothing more. The younger read from his notes and soon accused Nathan of stealing trade secrets. The accusation hung like a blade. Grace's voice turned to steel as she defended him. The older man produced a search order with a bright red stamp. One glance told Grace it bore Ether's seal, not a court's. The facade fell. They were not police. The younger man went for a gun. Nathan broke his draw and wrenched his arm aside. The shot dug into the doorframe. Grace fired and dropped the older fake officer with a shoulder hit. Smoke, shouting, splinters, the cabin filled with the chaos of a staged raid. She ordered Leo to stay put and meant it. In seconds, she barred the door with a table while Nathan stuffed the USB and papers into a worn leather pack. They would have to move. More would come. Leo would not be left behind again. Grace's eyes burned with the knowledge that fear held no leverage over someone with nothing left to lose. Engines gathered outside, more of them closer. They had to move now. She called for Leo's coat, opened the back door to the knifing cold, and the 3 of them fled down the narrow track to the tree line. Headlights washed the cabin as figures closed in. Thunder rolled, the first drops hit the roof, and the old house, now a battlefield over a buried truth, fell behind them. The USB in Grace's hand felt warm, like a small life waiting to be born in the storm. The forest rain came down like gravel, pounding their shoulders as they ran through a trail turned to slurry. Grace's strides matched Nathan's ragged breath and Leo's thin gasps. Each heartbeat boomed against the rain and thunder. She pulled her son close, face set and focused even as fear grew inside her. Engines roared behind them. Headlights lanced the trees like white eyes hunting in the night. They could not simply run. The pursuers had vehicles and numbers. Grace veered onto a narrow side path she knew, low enough that they had to duck under branches. Cold water sluiced down their necks, but she kept moving. In a burst of lightning, an old wooden bridge appeared over a swollen stream, water boiling white beneath it. The structure shuddered in the wind. If they could cross, the trail would hide their tracks. The bridge looked ready to fail. She decided it would hold for them if they trusted it. She carried Leo across the slick planks while each step cracked ominously. Nathan followed, gripping a steel cable to stay upright. They reached the far bank just as the bridge gave way with a concussive snap and crashed into the torrent. Breathing hard, they watched it vanish into the surge. Grace clutched her son and declared the pursuit broken. Nathan looked at her with astonishment and respect. She knew the route because her husband had once brought her through this same escape line and had told her this was the place to disappear and start again if the world ever demanded it. Leo trembled but smiled, certain his mother would save him. Half a mile later, they reached a small, rained-on cabin tucked into the mountainside. Rusted door, mossy walls, but inside it was dry. The lantern's yellow light revealed dusty photographs, including one of the men Grace had loved and lost. Nathan recognized maps and notebooks on the desk, the workspace her husband had used when investigating engine faults and suspecting that Ether's new system was unstable, altered from his original designs. The accident had struck as he prepared to speak out. Nathan realized then that her husband had been killed. Grace corrected the thought. They only believed they had killed him because he had left his work behind for her to find. From a drawer, she produced a worn leather notebook. On the first page in his hand, he had written that if she was reading it, the cycle had started again. Inside were detailed designs, annotations, and a list of names, some crossed out in red. Engineers, advisors, and inspectors erased by accidents and disappearances. Nathan saw the pattern clearly, a ledger of elimination. Together, they understood that combining Nathan's data with the original evidence would be undeniable. If found first, they would at least force their enemy to face them as equals. Grace stowed the notebook, and the steady patter of rain on tin returned as the storm eased. The peace felt taut and temporary, the inhale before the next blow. Nathan tried to lift Leo's spirits with a thought about flight. Planes rose not by fighting the wind, but by using it. The boy smiled, and Grace felt a moment of fragile calm. She doused the lantern. Outside, the downpour passed, but inside them, another storm gathered, stronger, named Truth. Dawn laid a silver sheen over the pines. The rain had stopped, mist still clung to the lake, and the cabin where they had spent the night crackled softly with fire. Grace studied her husband's leather notebook, its urgent notes and warnings like messages from across time. Nathan stood by the window. On the table, the USB and the notebook waited like the last two pieces of a riddle. They decided to go straight to the press through someone Nathan trusted and to keep moving a step ahead of any block. Before that, Grace needed to visit the lake and tell her husband that the end was finally in sight. They drove down through fog, Leo silent in the back with his model airplane. At the shore's edge, Grace knelt, held her worn silver wedding band, renewed her vow never to be silent again, and let the ring sink with small circles shimmering under the pale morning light. Nathan understood she had closed one chapter and opened a more dangerous but righteous one. On the road toward town, black cars waited. Grace cut across a sidetrack that hugged the hill as engines thundered behind them. Nathan found the small gun she'd hidden, but she refused to give their pursuers an excuse. A fork appeared, highway or abandoned mine. She chose the mine so they would think she had trapped herself. The truck plunged into the black tunnel, the flashlight jittering across splintered timbers and rust. At the mouth, the SUV idled with knife-bright headlights and a cold, familiar voice ordering them to surrender the data in exchange for their lives. Nathan and Grace understood that their enemies already knew the value of what they carried. She decided the truth was the only thing they couldn't take. She gave Nathan the USB and told him to get it out with Leo while she held the entrance. Gunfire shattered the lights and turned the tunnel into waves of darkness punctuated by sparks and stonefall. Nathan and Leo slipped through a rear passage to a nearby cabin, opened the laptop, and pushed the archive to an independent press server. The progress bar crept upward as an explosion rolled through the mine and painted the sky red. The transfer completed. Thousands of pages, documents, evidence, internal reports were now beyond erasure. Nathan looked toward the blaze and knew she had done what she promised. 3 months later, Silverpine was quiet. Summer wildflowers covered the slopes. Leo sat on the dock with a new model airplane he had built himself, Grace carved into the wing. Nathan set down a coffee and repeated one of Grace's beliefs. Courage was not in daring to fly, but in believing in the sky after a fall. The boy said he missed his mother, and Nathan admitted everyone did. The model drifted across the water under a golden sun. That morning's paper announced Ether's collapse after a safety cover-up and credited anonymous data from an engineer and a woman who had sacrificed herself to reveal the truth. A breeze moved across the lake with the scent of pine and coffee as Nathan looked up at sunlight breaking through the clouds, certain she had kept her word, and that light always returns after the storm.